Hey there, welcome into Unpaid Interns. We are back for our first episode of 2021 after taking a much needed vacation for me, but so excited to be back and talking a little bit of Indiana football today. It's been a week since the Hoosiers fell to the Ole Miss Rebels at the Outback Bowl in Tampa. Certainly a disappointing loss for sure, but a lot to talk about and reflect on. A memorable season for Indiana. And Mike Miller of Crimson Quarry joins us today to recap the season and look ahead a little bit as well to next year. Mike, it's great to have you on. How you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Griffin.
And Mike, I'll start with this. I kind of alluded to it in the open. It just felt like Indiana was going to win the Outback Bowl leading up to it because of everything that had happened this season. And then it was almost like suddenly the old Indiana football returned in the bowl game. And the Hoosiers really just a shocking loss to a team that was 4-5 coming into the game. I guess now that we've kind of had a week off to kind of reflect on this game, how do you feel like it fits into the narrative of the what was certainly a remarkable 2020 season for IU football?
Yeah, it's still disappointing, and I think it's going to continue to be disappointing as we continue to sort of digest everything we watched from this team this season. That said, it really is. Bowl games on that tier, they're kind of just gravy anyway. I mean, getting to those bowl games is really the whole point, and obviously you want to win them if you're going to play them. But I don't think it really erases any of the goodwill that Indiana football fostered in this strange season of so many breakthroughs. And sorry to use that word, but they did a lot of good things, and obviously it ended on a pretty sour note. But overall, it was still a really good season. I think will be remembered as such. That said, I think there were obviously some factors that sort of fed that disappointment. Primarily, just the frustration and the disappointment with the college football playoff selection. Not getting a New Year's Six bowl, and the whole thing with the Big Ten pretty much all year long, or at least in the last month of the season, and feeling like the Big Ten wasn't fighting for Indiana. There are a lot of factors at play there too. Just feeling like they were, not being respected, not being taken seriously as they otherwise should have been. And with all that, you wanted to see an Indiana football team come out that was angry, that was wanted to prove people wrong, and that really just looked the complete opposite of the team that we saw. Obviously, that wasn't the case, and so I think again that sort of fed the disappointing feeling that a lot of folks had. But honestly, I wrote after that game, that when you go through all that, when you with all the hand wringing, with all of the comments that were made about not being respected and having a team that's it's us against the world kind of thing, when you do all that, when you say all that, when you go through all that, you got to back it up. You can't do that and then do that. You can't show up in the bowl game and play like that. But also, I've thought just in the week or so since that game happened, I would probably temper some of the the anger and the frustration. It was a team that hadn't played football in basically a month, and again, I don't know really how you reconcile that with other years where there's usually a layoff between bowl games. But the fact that this team couldn't practice, the fact that a lot of teams had gone through similar types of breaks, pauses throughout the year, but Indiana's was right at the end, right when they really were need to get going, really needed to practice with a new quarterback, different personnel, that kind of thing. I'm sure that played a part as well. But point being, great year, tough ending. But I'm not sure that a whole lot of weight needs to be placed on exactly how it ended in that final bowl game.
You look at the football side of things. I mean, Indiana was a heavy favorite for multiple reasons, including Ole Miss had a very inconsistent defense on the season, and offensively was missing 67%, 2/3 of the receiving production, and was without their starting running back in the game. I mean, what just went wrong for Indiana, a team that outside of Michael Penix went into the game fully healthy?
Yeah, I think that one thing that they mentioned after the game that I totally buy is just the tempo with which Ole Miss played. I mean, I think that really disrupted the things that Indiana wanted to do defensively, and that was kind of surprising too. Just that we knew Ole Miss was good offensively. We knew that they put up points on on everybody. But also just the fact that they were missing so many guys, and that you didn't really know exactly what to expect from that Ole Miss offense. Personally, I wasn't expecting much, just given the personnel that was not going to be on the field. But I do think the tempo is something that they struggled with. I mean, Indiana's a team that they get the calls in, right up until the ball is snapped, and being able to set up and almost sort of premeditate the kinds of angles they're going to take, the blitzes they're going to do. I mean, a lot of Indiana's defensive success this year was built through that sort of surprise attack. The ability to bring blitzes from all different areas, the ability to sort of confuse opposing quarterbacks into believing they're going to do one thing when they do something else. And I think just that tempo, that moving so fast, was something that maybe they just weren't accustomed to, weren't really prepared for, kind of got them out of their comfort zone, and it sort of really snowballed, it seemed like, on that defensive side of the ball. I think offensively was maybe the bigger disappointment when you do look at that game, just because Ole Miss's defense is horrible. It was just really, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm trying to remember going into that game. I think they were dead last in passing defense. The rushing defense was not. It was just a very bad defense. It was essentially the 2013 Indiana football team that Indiana found itself playing. A very good offense that moved very fast, and a defense that really couldn't stop anybody. And so to play like that, on the offensive side, and kind of abandon the running game, for lack of a better term. It was disappointing. But then again, it's a backup quarterback, and Jack Tuttle was hurt. I think there are some mitigating factors there to the disappointment. But taken as a whole, though, I mean, it was not the offense we'd seen. And I think on a larger scale, I think what was disappointing about it was that you had seen an Indiana football team come out in every single game up to that point, and had really handled the stage or the moment, whatever it was, really handled it well. And that's not always something that team has done, that program has done. They handled wins. They came off of wins with some maturity. They came off of losses with maturity, and they really did it all throughout the year. And so to really just not really ever have any sort of traction in that game was surprising. And yes, I keep using the word disappointing, but yes, that too.
You mentioned earlier, it's just a bowl game, and in the end, much of the goal is to get to a bowl game. And I guess maybe the issue some fans have with that now, and especially, lifelong Indiana football fans, this program hasn't won a bowl game since 1991. They've now lost 6 bowl games in a row. And it felt like the next inevitable step for this program, which is, checked off a lot of boxes in this 2020 season, was winning a bowl game. I guess how much of a stain is it on the program to lose? And I mean, what do they need to do to win that game, and what does that do eventually for the program if and when they can finally win a postseason game?
Yeah, I think it's sort of that next step in the progression. I mean, it's they did so many things, they exercised so many demons this year throughout the regular season and within the Big Ten. I think that next logical step is just winning a bowl game, just to say you've won the bowl game, just to kind of get that monkey off your back. Tom Milan has, ever since he came here or at least took over the head coaching role, he's trotted out a lot of numbers, and numbers such as, however many years it was since Indiana last won the Big Ten, or last played in a Rose Bowl. And I'm not sure he actually used the number of how many years it's been since I won a bowl game, but point being, there's a lot of things that Indiana has been trying to check off the list, and that's certainly one of them. And you're absolutely right. Personally, I think that getting to the bowl game is important. And again, once you get there, it does feel like it's kind of gravy. But you're right. When you're Indiana and you haven't won since 1991, before everybody on the field playing for you was even born, and by some distance, you need to win a game. You need to get in there and just sort of get that off your back. And I think that would it's going to kind of be something that I think hangs over them to a certain degree until they actually do it. You talk about how previous years. I mean, you look at this team and going into games against Michigan and Ohio State, it's always like, they can compete, but it always at a certain point always felt like sometimes the moment was too big, or they just weren't equipped enough to mentally get over that hump. It just seemed to be year after year not getting over that hurdle. just seemed to weigh on them. And I thought one of the big things that they could have done this season was take advantage of this weird year and beat a Michigan or beat a Penn State, or go on the road and win at Michigan State, a place you haven't won in almost 2 decades. Just get over that mental block, and they did that. In a lot of instances. And so, yeah, I think that when you talk about sort of just getting over that mental hurdle and doing things that you don't typically do, winning a bowl game is probably important in that context as well.
You mentioned Jack Tuttle earlier. Obviously, Michael Penix went out for the season in November against Maryland, tore his ACL. Indiana hoping to get him back probably for fall camp or around August for next season. After a really good game against Wisconsin, I think most people would say for Tuttle was pretty underwhelming. He did separate his shoulder late in the second quarter. Probably didn't help his play in the second half. Was the game maybe a little bit revealing about maybe Tuttle isn't necessarily a capable quarterback, or a quarterback that for Indiana to continue playing at a high level? And I guess, how do you assess the quarterback situation just going into spring practice and eventually fall camp for next season?
I still think Indiana's in a great position with that quarterback room, especially when you consider they're bringing in a guy in oh my God, I'm spacing his name.
Donovan McCulley.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I don't space his name. I think that depth in that room is not something that Indiana has typically had. And I still think, worst case, I mean, if Jack Tuttle's your backup quarterback, I think you're in a really good spot. I think this program knows very well what it's like to not have, a quarterback you necessarily trust, or necessarily who can, command the offense or run the offense. But small sample size. I think we saw, both sides of the Jack Tuttle spectrum. I think we saw him make some really good throws, make some really good reads. I'll tell you what, I mean, the most impressive thing about his performance in the Wisconsin game was just the way he handled pressure. And that was really something that I thought Michael Penix did really, really well, throughout the season. Indiana's offensive line was just, kind of inconsistent. We can say that. And I think that just his ability to handle pressure all season, step into throws, even when the heat was turning up, really made Michael Penix the quarterback that he was, on top of all the arm talent that he has. And Jack Tuttle did that too. Jack Tuttle did that in the Wisconsin game. And so I think that sort of built some confidence in the level of player, the level of quarterback that Indiana has in that backup spot. And again, if that's your backup quarterback, I think you're in a really good spot if you're, a program such as Indiana. I mean, when you look at the Tom Allen era, I mean, one of the things that's been most impressive is just the ability to, build depth, increase conditioning. We've seen that depth, all across the field, particularly on the defensive side, a place where you really needed depth, a place where depth just hasn't really been there for decades. But he's also shown, I think, that he's built depth in the quarterback room, and you need to have that. And I think we've seen, the value in having depth, obviously, the last couple of years with some of the injuries Indiana's had. But, I think that, assuming Michael Penix will be back, and it sounds like he's going to be back and, ready to go in fall camp, he's your starter. And if that's what it is, then that's great, because Michael Penix is without question one of the top quarterbacks in the Big Ten. And then if Jack Tuttle's your backup, I think, again, you're in a really good spot. He's got arm talent. I'm not going to completely judge him on that one game in the Outback Bowl, because I still saw some stuff I liked in the Wisconsin game. Going back to when I was actually watching some of the, spring practices, you could see the arm talent. He's a talented quarterback. And I think all of the high school bona fides, suggest as much. But yeah, I still think Indiana's in a really good spot, quarterback wise, both with Michael Penix. And, again, if there's a situation next year where you need to turn to Jack Tuttle for a couple games, I think that, I think that Indiana and its fans, I think that folks should still feel pretty comfortable and confident with the options that IU has.
Is there a possibility that Tuttle transfers out of the program? I mean, obviously we saw that with Peyton Ramsey, who got an opportunity with Northwestern, certainly took advantage of it. I mean, Tuttle has at least proven he can, win a big game on the road against the top 25 team. That would certainly eliminate some of that depth, I guess, for Indiana at quarterback if he did transfer out.
Yeah, I mean, you never say never, especially in going into these next couple of years when some of those transfer rules are kind of fluid and changing all the time. But then again, I don't know how I could accurately answer that because I don't know what he's thinking. But I would say that if I were Jack Tuttle, I would also just sort of take into consideration I don't know his comfort level at Indiana. I'm assuming it's pretty good, but just also considering the fact that Indiana has shown, or at least Michael Penix has shown, that there could be an opening to play games. I mean, it's not a situation where Indiana has had one quarterback, in any of the last few seasons, just going all the way through. I mean, so there have been openings to play, and when you get those openings, you can run with them. You can take those and maximize them to your advantage. So, I don't know. I couldn't accurately, answer that. But I do think that if you're Jack Tuttle, you're probably looking at things and, assuming he's comfortable with scheme, comfortable with the coaching staff, which, I have no reason to think that he's not. I think that, I think he's got still in a good spot here. And especially, you'd probably think that Michael Penix, has maybe 1 year left in Indiana, assuming things go well next year. And then it's probably his show to run.
Wanted to zoom out a little bit, big picture, and just kind of look at the whole season. And one thing we've heard from some critics outside of Indiana football is the Hoosiers have only been one team with a winning record, and that was Wisconsin, who just barely had a winning record when they won their bowl game against Wake Forest. Was this season more of, Indiana lucked out with their schedule? COVID-19 was playing a factor. Michigan was really down. Penn State was down. Or was it, actual proof that this Indiana program can consistently in a normal year going forward be a top 20 team and a team that competes at the top of the Big Ten?
Yeah, maybe it's just because I've been watching this program pretty closely for a few years, but I think it's a good football team. I thought coming into the year, I thought it was a good football team. I think I predicted 6-3 just because it's Indiana football and you never want to get too confident. But I thought it was a good team, and I thought they proved that in 2019. I thought this was a collection of players and coaches that knew what they were doing, were good, talented, and well prepared to do things and take that next step. I mean, it's a good football team. I think that I think Indiana broke Penn State, to some degree. I think that in some vial in Bloomington, IU football holds the soul to Penn State football in 2020. I think they actually broke that team. I look at, I think also too, what I mentioned earlier was just sort of, getting over that mental block and beating the laundry on the field, beating the Michigans when you line up against those helmets, or, going on the road to Michigan State and winning in such thorough fashion in a place where you just haven't won since 2001. I mean, I think all that stuff and the way those games were won, the thorough, beating the brakes off of Michigan, shutting out Michigan State on the road, hanging in there with Penn State, even when, we weren't sure, we didn't know what Penn State was going to do at that point. It was the first game of the season. It's a good football team. And yeah, I think it's easy, and probably in some ways lazy to sort of say that, they're just a product of their schedule or the Big Ten was down. Well, I mean, Indiana's good. And I mean, a lot of that I think is kind of, using the eye test and not really having any sort of, you can probably point to some statistics as well, but I'm just looking at that team and I see a great quarterback. I see a lot of skill at the skill positions. I see a really fast and deep defense. It's a good football team. And I think that, you can point to some of the records around the Big Ten. You can look at, the schedule Indiana played, but I mean, those are still Big Ten football teams. And I think that, Indiana in its own right is rightfully deserving of being in that conversation as one of the best teams in the Big Ten this year, regardless of the records of the teams that they played. I mean, I'm not discrediting Indiana, and I don't think anybody else should, because of the record, the schedule that they played. I mean, I think they proved in those games and the way those games were won, the way those games were played, that they were and are a very good football team and should continue to be a very good football team moving forward. Just when you look at all the guys that are going to be coming back in 2021.
Well, it's always fun to hand out some awards at the beginning of the season. We make predictions, player of the year, and Indiana will have their awards dinner virtually, I would assume, in a couple of weeks, and hand out some of its awards. But wanted your take on who's a player of the year, and then maybe who's a breakout player of the year of someone that, we weren't really talking about at the beginning of the season and you thought really made a big difference for Indiana this season.
I would say I'm going to give you. I'll give you both sides. I'll say defense. It's an interesting question. I was thinking defensively. I mean, the two guys. I mean, there's a lot of guys who did really well, but I think it's a short list for MVP. I think it's probably either Tywan Mullen or Micah McFadden. And I probably lean toward McFadden. I think just everything he was able to do in the middle of that defense. And, that linebacker spot in that defense is so important. And, on top of that, just the production that he had and just the story that he has as a guy who was, not recruited at a very high level. I think expectations, probably externally were not very high for him during his Indiana career, but he's turned into one of the best linebackers in the league. And I think just having that kind of anchor in the middle of your defense, a guy you can count on game in, game out, I think he's probably my defensive MVP. I would say offensively, I think it's Michael Penix. I think it's almost kind of cliche to pick the quarterback, but really when you look at what he did, and again, I mentioned his ability to make the most of sort of an inconsistent offensive line and still perform and play through instances where he's fending off pressure, but also too with that he was able to pull some magic from his sleeves from time to time. He kind of developed into that emotional leader of the team where I think he developed a lot of trust. Guys trusted him to be able to make plays and in some ways improvise, just with it being able to read the field when things were breaking down or make throws that you may not have even been expecting. I mean, just everything he was able to do. Now, there were some inconsistencies. He wasn't perfect, no doubt, but I think all of the things that he did show, the arm skill, the ability to build rapport with receivers, the ability to play through pressure, the ability to just again improvise and make things happen when things break down or things are a little hairy out there. I think that just having that guy in that position, in that quarterback spot, leading the team in the ways that he did, I think that's MVP caliber right there.
Well, how about a surprising player, someone that maybe was the breakout player of the year, maybe, or most improved?
I think it's got to be Ty Freifogel. Again, if I'd love to, be more of a hipster and give you another guy that is a less heralded name, but I mean Ty Freifogel. I mean the guy again, like not a very highly ranked recruit coming in here, kind of flew under the radar even during his first 3 years on the field, but just to sort of do the things that he did this year, even coming into the year, it felt like he was almost a bit of a forgotten name. I was kind of thinking that Miles Marshall might pass him, coming into this year, might pass him on the depth chart as a guy that, next to Watt Fillier and Peyton Hendershot in the passing game, would kind of be your three guys. But just doing the things that he did, being so sure of hand in that passing game, I think was something that I'm not sure anyone else in the Big Ten saw coming. I don't even think I saw it coming. In fact, I didn't see it coming. So I think just the way that he broke out this year, I think I would give him the nod there.
Now, you mentioned Freifogel, maybe a little bit surprising. He announced last week he's returning to Indiana, while Watt Fillier not returning. Most other Hoosiers have already announced they're returning. Harry Kreider, IU center, the one exception. Still waiting for a few more names. I guess, were you surprised at all by Freifogel deciding to return, Fillier deciding to leave? And how do these, players leaving and some players staying, you feel like affect Indiana going forward?
I was a little surprised, but I mean, I think he could probably benefit from coming back. I mean, honestly, he can still do some more things, in a full season, to continue to build whatever stock he has, for the next level. And just with some of the other returners, I think it's, looking at the success this team had this year. I mean, they're returning, they're losing Harry Kreider and Watt Fillier, and a lot of these other guys are coming back. I mean, they're going to have guys on their offensive line. They still need to build depth there, so that's important. I think it'll be important to see whether Jerome Johnson comes back, because that would be a huge addition to the defensive line moving forward. But just with some of these, guys coming back, Michael Ziemba, who can, play on the edge and give you some sort of pass rushing presence. Guys. I think just the ability to bring some of these guys back, guys who've been in this good culture, guys who are good in that locker room. I think that's huge moving forward. But especially with Freifogel, I think that's such a huge key, because at times he was, it felt like he really was the guy that Penix trusted, and I think that connection right there, I think really fed that offense. And just having a quarterback like Michael Penix, who knew where to put the ball and placed it so well for Ty Freifogel, I think that helped too. That really fed where Ty Freifogel was able to go with his season. So it's so important. And I think, again, for a team that's been trying so hard to build depth, having this sort of bonus year, I think that helps keep that trajectory moving forward, in the right direction for 2021.
Start looking forward towards the offseason. Obviously, the NFL draft decision is the first step. We got another about 7 months before the season's scheduled to kick off in Iowa City on Labor Day weekend. What are just storylines and things that you're looking forward to for Indiana over these next 7 months?
I think, first and foremost, probably the defensive coordinator spot, who fills that. It's been interesting with Tom Allen. He's typically turned either to guys that he knows or guys who know guys that he knows. And I think that's kind of just how the coaching carousel works, at any level, whether you're talking about head coaches or coordinators or whatever. But I'll be interested to sort of see who he does pick for that role. It was interesting when he picked, Kane Womack a few years ago. And it was interesting again when he picked Nick Sheridan a year ago. But I think he's got a lot of trust. And I think, he's kind of earned the benefit of the doubt with some of these hires so far. I mean, he's done a really good job with staffing and putting guys in positions where they're capable and able to succeed. And it's looking at that defense. It's still his defense. It's still the defense that he wants. That 4-2-5 that he installed back in 2016. But trusting it to a guy such as Kane Womack, who was making the calls and maximizing the talent that he was given, turned out to be a great hire. And so now he's got to make another great hire. So it'll be interesting to see where he turns for that. It'll be interesting too to see just transfer portal, both incoming, outcoming. I think that it was I think good to see adding a center, Zach Carpenter from Michigan, because again you need more depth in the offensive line, especially in the interior. The interior just the whole line was inconsistent, but they need to be better and deeper on the inside. So getting a guy who can play and has played in the Big Ten, started games in the Big Ten, I think was really important too. I think it'll be interesting too with the schedule. I'm not sure there's any real concrete confirmation one way or the other whether the schedule that has been in place for a few years will remain the schedule or whether they're going to sort of shuffle that up again as well too, because it's an interesting schedule with opening at Iowa. I was looking at that schedule before we hopped on here just to kind of refresh my mind and see exactly what they have coming up in 2021. It's an interesting schedule as currently situated, just with the teams that they'll play and where those games will be played. So I think it's, you're still probably looking at a 7-8 win season next year, probably conservatively. So it'll be interesting to see if that schedule remains in place as well. But it's an interesting offseason. Got to get your quarterback healthy. You got to improve your running game. You got to continue to build depth on the offensive line. I think that those few things will be worth monitoring in the months to come.
Few more questions for you, Mike. I think one thing, maybe the thing that frustrated Indiana fans the most and was especially evident in the bowl game with Nick Sheridan's play calling. His first season as Indiana's OC with Kalen DeBoer leaving to become the head coach at Fresno State, especially in the bowl game, Indiana's offense was very inconsistent and they didn't really look for the run game until finally in the third quarter when it was really relatively effective. Fans wondering, well, why didn't you go to that earlier? What do you hope that Sheridan can develop going forward, and what were some of the issues you felt he had in this first season in Bloomington as calling plays?
I'm not so down on Sheridan. I wrote after that bowl game, it was as probably as dispiriting as you could probably end the season. But again, I in all fairness to him, I would hope that wouldn't overshadow the fact that he did do some nice things. I think the games that he called against Ohio State, I think the way that Indiana played against Michigan, the way that offense played against Michigan, the way they came out, the way they sustained it pretty much all throughout that game. He did some good things this year. I thought the wrinkle with the Wildcat against Maryland was good, and it was good to see him put confidence in deploying that in that game and using it when they just needed to get something going and trying something different. It was good to see. So it wasn't a total bust of a year. I mean, as a first-year play caller, so I would caution people to just put down the pitchforks if anyone's grabbed a pitchfork, which they probably should not. It was a first-year play caller, so there was some good. There was obviously, some not so good. I don't know if it's necessarily maybe needs to get better at just sort of maximizing the personnel that's on the field. I think they really need to figure out, how to put the puzzle together on the offensive line and the running game. I don't know if that's a thing where, again, the personnel just doesn't really, fit together with what they're trying to do running the ball and the guys who are blocking, whatever it is. It just hasn't really worked consistently. And that's huge. I think, one of the, going back to your last question, I think that's another huge priority for spring ball is just getting that running game figuring out what they need to do to be successful, to move the ball more consistently on the ground, because they've got some intriguing players in that backfield. I'm not a football coach to the level that I can diagnose exactly what's wrong with that running game, but it just never seemed to really gel with the people that they have involved in it. So I think that's a huge point of emphasis for Nick Sheridan and his staff moving forward. But some good and some bad. I think he falls right now, after 1 year, probably, in between the two coordinators we've seen with Tom Allen. You have Mike DeBoard on one side, who just the offense was just not very good under him. It was just too conservative. It never felt like it really, again, maximized the skill of the players on the field. And then Kalen DeBoer's, which was really dynamic and exciting. It was really a breath of fresh air. I think Nick Sheridan's probably in the middle of that, but again, I couldn't diagnose exactly, schematically what needs to be fixed. But again, I think just putting players in position to succeed, figuring out the run game, I think would go a long way to making that a little bit more aesthetically pleasing moving forward.
You mentioned next season, the schedule a little bit up in the air. The Big Ten said they might move the schedule around just because the schedule was so strange this year due to COVID-19 and lots of postponements and cancellations. Indiana right now mentions they're scheduled to open against Iowa. Their other crossover game is Minnesota. Pretty challenging two crossover games. They also play Cincinnati in their second non-conference game of the season at Memorial Stadium. Cincinnati, of course, finished with just one loss this season and will be returning its starting quarterback, Desmond Ridder. It seems like a pretty challenging schedule for Indiana, but we also thought in October when the new schedule came out, it was going to be a really challenging schedule for the Hoosiers. I guess what's your ceiling for wins for the team, you feel like, in 2021, and what's kind of the floor? And I mean, does Indiana, are they a team that starts in the top 25 and can stay there most of the year like they did pretty much for most of this season?
Yeah, I think it's a preseason top 25 team just because you look at, again, they're bringing back so many guys, and I think, again, this is a good football team, and schedule is always going to be challenging when you're in the Big Ten East and the divisions are aligned this way. It's always going to be an uphill climb for those teams. Indiana's fight is to really get into that second tier of teams in the Big Ten East. Ohio State is at that top tier on its own, and then in that second tier, you have those more traditional teams that have lived there. The Penn States, the Michigans, the Michigan States over the last few years. This is Indiana's chance to move into that tier, and with a strong 2021 season, I think they can do that. And honestly, yeah, it's a challenging schedule, but I see 7-8 wins. I think there's a ceiling of maybe 9. It's a good football team coming back. They showed it this year, but they're a good football team. And I especially, the question for me is going to be, you look at those games, Iowa to start out on the road, season openers are always kind of squirrely. So it's always hard to know exactly what those games are going to look like. But I think Indiana is going to have a better football team than Iowa's, but we'll see, just what it looks like in that first game of the year. But, that game, the Cincinnati game at home, and then again, what'll Michigan look like? What'll Penn State look like? You get Ohio State and Bloomington. Can you continue to beat up on Michigan State? Those last 3 games are going to be really interesting. I think it's Michigan State, Minnesota, Purdue, all winnable games. I think, as currently situated, Michigan State and Minnesota both come to Bloomington. So, you're positioned well for those. So, I see probably, if I'm making the pick right now, I'm going with 8-4. Again, there's always a little bit of hesitation to go all in on Indiana football just because I think we've all seen Indiana football do Indiana football things. But again, I think it's a good football team, and I think they should be confident. I think fans should be confident that they can continue to be a good football team because of the personnel that's coming back, the depth that they've built. Just a lot of the pieces at play. I think it's a good football team. I think they can win 8 games. We'll see what the schedule ultimately shakes out to be. But again, it's always going to be tough in the Big Ten East, but just looking at the way they match up against some of these teams and looking at some of the things they did to sort of get the monkey off their back in certain situations against certain teams this year, I think it paves the way to another fun and fruitful season in 2021.
Hoosier fans certainly counting down the days until the start of the 2021 season. Mike, before I let you go, we are in the heart of basketball season, so wanted to just really get your quick thoughts on both the IU men's basketball team and the IU women's basketball team.
Oh boy. I wish the women's games were televised more on TV because they're a fun team to watch. I mean, they've got, I think with them I think last Monday was disappointing because they put themselves in such a hole, and winning that game would have done so much for that program. I think both internally, but also just sort of, nationally. I mean, that's kind of, the hurdle that the women's program is still trying to cross. They've proven that they are one of the best Big Ten teams, but they've not yet established that they are the best Big Ten team. And that's what they want to do. And until they beat Maryland, they've never beaten Maryland. Until they do that, until they beat, those top, that top Big Ten team in particular, that's kind of that hurdle for them to cross. But, it's interesting, it's a fun team. They've got a lot of interesting pieces. Just yesterday, the ability to turn on the shooting, and you're starting to see Ali Patberg really turn it on. She's had 2 really good games back to back. She did not play well against Maryland, but she's played really well against Penn State and Wisconsin coming out of that. So the response has been good. It's an interesting team. I think that they've got a shot to make a bit of a run in March. But again, that I don't think they get Maryland again this year, and that was I think a real squandered opportunity, just given the way that game started, the way they fell into such a deep hole, and as valiantly as they fought, they just couldn't quite climb out of it. That was an opportunity missed, and that was, I think, really disappointing because I think this team is talented enough. They're good enough. I think Terry Moore has proven that she can coach well enough to kind of get them to this point in the Big Ten, but still, you got to beat Maryland. I mean, they could have beaten Maryland, but just that start really buried them. So that was disappointing. And gosh, the men's basketball team. I don't know what to say. It's just not a very fun team to watch. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. It's I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what happens on Thursday. I was trying not to look too much and overanalyze the Nebraska game because they just needed to win. They got it. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't fun, but that's just kind of what this program is at this point. I mean, everything always seems a little bit harder than it has to be. But yeah, I mean, this stretch upcoming, beginning with Purdue. I mean, Purdue's beatable, but Archie Miller hasn't beaten Purdue. This program hasn't beaten Purdue. So I'm curious to see the urgency on Thursday to get a game like that. But then after that, I mean, you get into a stretch where I haven't seen the polls. I'm not sure, who's exactly ranked right now, but I think last week or so, or 2 weeks ago, I mean, everyone on the remaining part of the schedule, I think except for Purdue at the end was ranked. So, coming into this stretch, I looked at these last 4 games, absolutely crucial, where they had to get 3 wins. They got 3 wins. They were unconvincing wins, but they were wins nonetheless. And really right now, they needed wins with this sort of softer part of the schedule because the teeth are closing in. And so it's all a matter of, will they be able to sort of handle the moment? I don't have much confidence in this team. I just feel like it's just I don't know. I don't know how to exactly diagnose it other than to say that it's not a team you can really trust offensively. Defensively, they haven't been as good in conference as they were during the first month. I think just looking at the conference numbers in terms of defensive efficiency, they're like 8th right now, which if your identity as a program is going to be on the defensive side of the ball, and you're going to be offensively or at least scoring challenged, you better be really, really good, if not elite, defensively to sort of make up for some of the things that you don't do well on the other end. And so right now they're not elite. They're not consistently very good. So that's a little concerning given the stretch that's coming up. But we'll see. It'll be interesting just kind of see how it all plays out over the next couple months. But really, really interested to see what the women's program does because I think that's a really good team. I think they could make a bit of a run when it gets to the tournament time.
Going to be an interesting next couple months for IU hoops on both the men's and the women's side. Mike, really appreciate you joining Unpaid Interns today. Great insight.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right, that will do it for today's episode of Unpaid Interns. We will be back on Wednesday with another great episode. We hope you will join us then. If you've missed any of our past Unpaid Interns episodes or want to rewatch some of this one, as always, you can check it out on the IU Sports Media YouTube page or Twitter page, or you can listen to it in audio form wherever you get your podcasts. That will do it today. For Mike Miller, I'm Griffin Epstein. We'll talk to you again real soon.